Good evening. Welcome to another session in our Experiencing the Buddha's Teachings. And I'm Wai Chung. Good evening, Craig. We are going through a module called the Way of Bodhisattva. And in this module, we are looking into more details, the practices of Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is a Buddhist term, of course, someone who has generated a genuine altruistic motivation within themselves, altruistic motivation on the basis of loving kindness and compassion, and not just our ordinary loving kindness and compassion. These are sometimes described as great compassion, great love, in which the scope of our concern encompasses all sentient beings, and wishing our love and compassion to help sentient beings find happiness and the true causes of happiness, and help sentient beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So there's that aspiration to be of benefit to all sentient beings, and in order to fulfill the aspiration, Bodhisattva is someone who aspires to achieve the state of a Buddha, achieve the state of enlightenment, in order to fully understand what is involved in being free from suffering and the causes of suffering. Liberation is what we call in Buddhism. And having realized that, then to be in the best position to be of benefit to others. So this motivation, this altruistic motivation, is also called bodhicitta. So someone who will generate bodhicitta, a mind of awakening or mind of enlightenment, is called bodhisattvas in the Buddhist tradition. So a bodhisattva is someone who has a very clear so-called career path, so to speak, because there is a certain direction established by his or her aspiration, and that is to be of benefit to others. And in order to be of greater benefit to others, to actually actualize the state of enlightenment or awakening within themselves. So there is a twofold aspect to it. One is the main thing is, of course, to fulfill the welfare of others. But alongside with that, there's also a need to fulfill the welfare of oneself, take oneself to the final stage of enlightenment. Yeah. And so in the previous modules, we talk about how we can develop this altruistic attitude within ourselves. Of course, we have to do it probably gradually, bit by bit, and just simply learning to get in touch with our natural loving kindness and compassion, and to grow and reinforce those wonderful heartfelt qualities. And in this module, we look at the more practical aspects of how to actualize, have that motivation, then how to actually actualize and proceed along our spiritual path, to work towards enlightenment, and at the same time, at our level, to be of benefit to others as well. Yeah, so we don't have to sort of like postpone benefiting others until we achieve enlightenment, which might take a while. Yeah, so along the way, we can also, it's like on-job training. We also train ourselves. So it's not so that when we become a Buddha, we are well trained, to be of benefit to others. Yeah. So this training takes the form of 6 practices called paramitas in Sanskrit, and usually translated as perfections. But I have born to pick this translation. Not that there's anything wrong with it, because paramitas have a connotation, a meaning of excellences, achieving excellences in terms of these 6 practices of generosity, of ethical discipline, of patience, of joyous effort, of concentration, and wisdom. So they are the 6 paramitas. But I actually quite like how Tibetans translate this Sanskrit term paramitas. In Tibetan, I think it goes something like paradu chinpa. Paradu means the other side. Chinpa means to go to the other side, or to bring to the other side. Of course, the other side is the famous analogy in Buddhism of the other shore. That this shore is full of conflict and strife, full of suffering, confusion. There's full of hatred and attachment, craving, and ignorance. And in between this shore and the other shore, there's of course the treacherous water of the river. But the other shore is a place of great peace. The freedom from ignorance, freedom from hatred, freedom from craving and clinging. It's a place of genuine loving kindness and compassion, and the peace and happiness of nirvana. Of course, this is just an analogy. This shore and that shore, other shore is probably all happening in here and now in this very moment. But and the paramitas are practices for crossing over, take us from where we are to the other shore. So, in terms of this analogy, but of course, not only are we taking ourselves over, but we are also able to ferry others over, depending on our practice, the strength of our practice. So I like this idea. It's not so much of keep telling ourselves I need to be perfect. I think in our modern societies, this word to be perfect or perfection carry with it certain unintended connotations. Maybe, after all, we can become quite perfectionistic, and we put a great deal of unrealistic expectations on ourselves and others. And if we get caught in this loop of perfectionism, it's not necessarily very helpful. Which is why I like to, in my mind, translate the paramitas, not so much as to be perfect. It's a very funny thing about the perfection. I notice it when having taught meditation for so many years, that people come into meditation course, maybe even their very first meditation session, with a certain kind of expectation of themselves, or also of me, the person teaching. I often say that they only give me one chance, not even the second one, just one chance. The first meditation they do with me has to be perfect. And they expect themselves, I don't know whether they have past meditation experience or not, they expect themselves, there's a certain image, I know, I can feel it in the way they talk about it, that their body must be in a certain state, must look perfect, really like those magazine meditations posture. I try to advise them not to break some joints or something like that. And also the inner experience has to be perfect. I don't know what that is, but usually it's something to do with no thinking. Like you should instant calm and bliss and peace and no thinking. All should happen in the very first session of a meditation course. Now, of course, if you can achieve it, that will be perfect. But I think that is putting quite a bit of expectations, unrealistic expectation on ourselves, also on the teacher, the poor teacher. What can I say? So you're bound to be disappointed if that's the case. So the idea of perfection should also be tempered with a sense of in a more realistic way, that there is definitely a journey, a process involved. Might take a while, And so from that point of view, it's natural to have very first, or who knows, for quite a bit of time in our meditation experience, things will not look perfect. Things will probably look far from perfect. We will encounter a lot of different kind of experiences, not all of which are pleasant, and but that doesn't mean that we are not progressing. That doesn't mean that we are not learning how to meditate and that we are not benefiting from our meditation practice. So precisely because of this kind of experiences that I have, I try to steer away from the term perfection of generosity, perfection of ethical discipline. Can you imagine, by the time we finish this module, you end up with 6 things that you must do perfect. And on top of it, we load on all this very unrealistic expectation on ourselves, on others. It's really a recipe for trouble, so to speak. But if we think of it as paramitas, as that which take us beyond, it has this liberating quality to it. That means when I practice giving, the act of giving, not only on a conventional sense is beneficial, you're very generous, but somehow embedded within it is the possibility of freedom. Not only to set others free from suffering, free from the conditions and causes of suffering, but also for me, who is engaged in that practice, to taste freedom. That maybe the act of giving itself help me to step away from certain limitations, certain old habits, and help me move ever closer, figuratively, to the other shore of great peace and ease. So there is this liberating quality that we try to find and try to encourage. And that is a much nicer way of approaching the practice. And I think also practically speaking, a very helpful way of engaging this practice to ask ourselves, is this act of giving helping me to be free from my old limitations, my old constraints, my old habits, or is this act of giving entrench me in those old habits? I'm still caught up in the same old loop, same old stories. So that gives us a certain criterion to gauge and to learn from our experience. Okay, so that's the parameters, the 6 parameters. And today I'm going to start on briefly explaining the first of the 6 parameters, the parameters of generosity or of giving. So how can the act of generosity or giving become something that help us to transcend our current suffering situation, our current limitations, our current habits, habits that keep us trapped in an unhappy situation, and to through the act of giving and generosity, move ever closer to the other shore, to come to realize freedom for ourselves and also to be of benefit to others. The parameters have to be practiced on the basis of the twofold qualities of method and wisdom, or sometimes we can also call it compassion and wisdom. That the parameters are not separate from these two wings, so-called wings to help us fly to enlightenment. In fact, we can see each of the parameters as an expression also of those twofold qualities of wisdom and compassion, and to be rooted in wisdom and compassion. There is also a teaching that says that when we practice one of the parameters, we also need to integrate the other 5 into it, so that the so-called 6 practices, 6 parameters, are not viewed as 6 separate, completely separate, isolated practices. That even in the act of giving itself, we can also, with mindfulness, try to practice and bring in the other 5 of them. So let's start with that, so that we don't think of, as we go through the 6 practices, we don't think of them as some isolated, standalone practice. Instead, we can see how they interact with the other 5, and how altogether these 6 parameters actually create the favorable conditions to help us to go beyond, to help us to reach the other shore. So with generosity, later I'll explain in greater details the practice of giving. But as we well understand, practice of generosity and giving, while we are being generous, while we are learning and trying to give, learning about how best to give, we also need to take care to practice the other 5. So second one is ethical discipline, or living in accordance to ethical principles. So the giving itself as an action should also align itself with ethical principle. The most important principle in Buddhism, Buddhist teaching, is non-harming. So this act of giving itself, is it harmful? Does it involve harming someone? Does it involve harming ourselves? Does it involve harming others? So that is something to consider. And the act of giving itself, is it motivated? What is it motivated by? Does it involve any of those unwholesome qualities, unwholesome actions? So, like unwholesome actions, like does it involve killing, stealing, misuse of our sexual energy, sexual misconduct, so to speak? Does it involve the default or the flaws of speech, lying, harsh speech, slander, and also something I call idle gossip, speech that increases hatred or attachment or ignorance. Yeah, and is it motivated by? Is there any traces of the mental quality of covetousness, or ill will, or wrong view? Yeah. So of course, most of the time we think that giving is just giving. Of course, what could go wrong with it? But sometimes it's good to be a bit more mindful and to consider and to look at our act of giving. Does it also align with our ethical principle? The next is, are we able to practice patience in giving? We can be very generous and be very impatient in the giving. Then we can, noticing that, then we can ask ourselves, is it possible for me while giving, when engaged in some forms of generosity, to also embody the quality of patience? Patience is an undisturbed mind, especially undisturbed by anger, by irritation and resentment. Yeah. So that is also another consideration. And giving in relation to joyous effort. This is an interesting one. Does the act of giving itself, joyous effort means, am I to put energy into encouraging wholesome qualities to make an appearance, to manifest in our life, in our actions, and for those that are manifest to strengthen those wholesome qualities, strengthen the qualities of kindness, of compassion, of wisdom, of generosity itself, of course. And also, am I using the energy of my attention skillfully, and so that the opposite, that it prevents unwholesome quality from making an appearance, from manifesting. And if they already manifest, can I diminish the strength of those unwholesome qualities, like impatience or being irritable? Can I weaken the strength? Can I shorten its duration? Can I make it happen less frequently? So much so that it is diminishing the unwholesome, encouraging the wholesome. So is my act of giving also be able to embody this quality of joyous effort? So much so that the more I give, I'm actually growing the wholesome quality. Could be generosity and other things, kindness, compassion, and I'm at the same time also diminishing anything unwholesome like stinginess, tight-fistedness, and attachment, and so forth. Or could it be possible that while giving, my act of giving is actually encouraging, growing some unwholesome quality, such as pride in a negative sense, like a sense of growing ego, getting a big head, so to speak, feeling of superiority, a very subtle sense of looking down on others that you're giving to, reinforcing a certain superior sense of self at the expense of others. So those little things we also need to be mindful of. So, and is the act of giving able to integrate with the practice of concentration? Concentration here, or absorption, can be viewed as a mind state, a particular state of mind in which all the different functions are working harmoniously together. This concentration is not the one that we normally associate with the word. The concentration, concentrate, I must focus. A lot of tension, a lot of effort. Almost like we're trying to squeeze something out, like a toothpaste out of the tube, trying to squeeze out something called concentration. In fact, it's a very expensive, very kind of spacious state of mind, in which everything seems to, all the different functions seems to flow smoothly, work harmoniously together. It's the opposite of a fragmented state of mind. fragmented means the different parts are in conflict. One say go there and say don't go here. It's actually everything come back together and working harmoniously together. So it's giving, in line with such a state of mind, a state of mind of absorption, such that in the act of giving, all aspects of ourselves, physical, mental, emotional, are in line and working harmoniously together towards the same goal. Or is within ourselves, there's this tug of war, to give, not to give, not to give, not to give. Things are splintering, or in the act of trying to give, we are suppressing something, we're pushing something out of awareness, we are denying certain things within ourselves. Usually, trying to be a good Buddhist, we deny a lot of things, we suppress a lot of things into the shadow. We may be very unwilling to acknowledge our own attachment to things, or attachment is very powerful. Later we will talk about that. So to suppress our attachment, to pretend as if we are not attached, or sometimes people have this way of practice where they say that we need to necessarily go against our attachment. Nothing wrong with that instruction, to go against our attachment. But the way to do it, we need some skillfulness. If all we know is to constantly suppress or deny our attachment and just keep pushing forward, in a certain direction, we are not actually addressing the issue. We're not actually addressing our attachment. Our attachment is not actually weakening. It's just been suppressed, kept out of sight and out of mind. But who knows? Actually, our attachment is growing in strength, and require even more energy to suppress it. And that is not actually a skillful way of practicing, because the very act of giving, in opposition to attachment, seems to be feeding and strengthening our attachment. And that is a wrong effort. And so that is a state of mind which is in conflict, that has been fragmented, and we are not actually addressing that fragmentation. And lastly, of course, giving is also to be coupled with wisdom of different types. Just common sense wisdom, to make sure that what we give are actually beneficial and not actually compounding the problems or transferring the problem from one place to another place. And also, on a deeper level, that the giving itself is not in turn feeding the sense of ego or self, the self-grasping, grasping onto a certain ideas or image of self, and the giving becomes fewer this kind of what we call ignorance, self-grasping ignorance, that solidify a certain image, self-image in our mind, one that is not accurate, that is not in accord with reality, but nonetheless we uphold that image, we invest so much in it, we think that is who we truly are. So that's just a very brief mention of the need to not isolate the 6 practices, but within limits. Of course, when we are actually giving, we can't think of so many things. But in general, just to keep in mind, even at the back of our mind, that the practices, the 6 parameters, are not separate from one another. On occasion of giving, there are actually opportunity to practice and to bring in the other parameters. So much so that they mutually support one another and mutually reinforce one another, and they get to grow together. It's not like I practice one parameter at the expense of another's. Instead, when we are able to do it in a good way, in a healthy way, we allow all of them to grow at the same time. Okay. So that's quite a bit of explanation there. But I think with generosity, the most important thing at the heart of it, let's look a little bit at how in Buddhism we define generosity. Generosity is the act of giving under the mental intention of generosity, wishing to give, of course, motivated by loving kindness and compassion, wholesome qualities of mind, to be of benefit, to whoever it is that we are giving to. And having that mental intention of generosity or giving, and then to express it through speech, because depending on what sort of things you are giving, like teaching, teaching Buddhism. It doesn't actually have to be Buddhism. Teaching a skill to someone that you say, let's say you are very knowledgeable and you're sharing your knowledge, your skill. You're teaching someone. You're explaining. Maybe teaching is too formal. Explaining something to another person, sharing that information. That is an act of giving, and this kind of giving happens through the medium of speech. Of course, the more common type of giving we are associated with are the physical giving away of money, giving away of material things, food, and so on and so forth. Giving gifts is a form of generosity, a form of giving. So it starts off with the mental intention of generosity that is motivated by wholesome qualities. Could be kindness, could be compassion, could be anything. Anything that is wholesome and positive. And then it also, and on occasions, it also need to be manifest through speech, through verbal actions, or through bodily behavior, physical actions. So that is a very simple way of understanding generosity and giving. Notice the emphasis between mental intention and also the physical act, physical verbal act. So both are important. Of course, Buddhism, the Buddha's teaching tends to emphasize a lot on recognizing and clarifying intention, as well as the motivating factors behind that intention. The motivating factors ought to be something virtuous and wholesome, wisdom, like kindness, compassion, love, and so on and so forth. And then there is also a place here that giving is not just entirely inside the head, kind of a mental act, but there are also on many occasions need to manifest in physical acts of speech and physical giving, actual giving. And the main obstacles to the practice of the paramitas of generosity, of course, is the opposite of generosity itself. And of course, we call it stinginess, miserliness. But at the heart of stinginess and miserliness is, of course, our attachment to whatever it is, and not willing to give, not willing to share. Giving, the material of giving, quite often they talk about in three different categories. First is the giving of teaching, which includes sharing, of course, the Dharma teaching, Dharma knowledge, information, but can also include, in a broader sense, the sharing of knowledge and information that are beneficial to others. Doesn't have to be the Buddhist teaching. Even to share what you know, medical knowledge, computer knowledge, who knows, whatever it is, but it is of benefit to others. That is an act of giving of teaching. Then the second type of giving is giving of fearlessness. Giving of fearlessness is to extend protection to others, to protect others from fear, to protect others from danger, to save others from a situation of danger or harm. That is another form of giving. This, of course, Buddhists have this practice of animal liberation, which is getting more and more complicated these days in our modern complicated society. In the old days, it simply means either you purchase or you physically rescue another living being who is in the danger of losing their life. So that act of saving others, protecting others from danger, is a form of giving of fearlessness, so that they are free from fear and danger. So that's the second type. The third type, of course, is the most common, giving of material things, donations, of money, of material, of food, and other things. The giving of gifts, a present to a friend. All of that come under material giving. So these are the three types of generosity, three types of giving: teaching, of fearlessness, of material resources. But we need to look at how can we enhance our generosity, our giving. How can we work with its main obstacles, which is attachment. So we can be attached to, of course, we can be attached to material possessions. Material possession. We can be attached to knowledge. It's an interesting thing, but not uncommon. Even in the modern world, in universities, in academia, in various contexts, we hoard knowledge. Just as we hoard material things, we hoard money, we hoard possessions. We also hoard knowledge and information. In certain contexts, information is also very valuable. So that is another way we can show our attachment. And of course, in terms of fearlessness, saving others from danger and fear may involve material things, money to purchase certain animals who are destined for slaughter in order to practice this practice of animal liberation, to free them from the danger or the fear of being killed, and to place them in a place of safety. So attachment is in Buddhism considered a diluted state of mind. So therefore, it is possible for us, because it is diluted, involve a distortion. Therefore, it's possible for us with wisdom and practice, able to free ourselves from it. We are able to set things right, because in itself, the attachment involves a mistake, a distortion. Otherwise, it will be very hard to be rid of attachment if attachment has that grain of truth in it. But in actual fact, that's not. Attachment involves a distortion. Attachment inevitably involves projecting certain exaggerated qualities onto the objects of attachment. So the object of attachment could be material things, could be money, could be material possessions, could be people, and so on and so forth. Could be knowledge, something quite abstract as knowledge and information. We can also project certain qualities onto it. Now, that projected quality onto the objects themselves is the one that is distorted. So that means the objects themselves do not actually possess or do not actually correspond to the projected image. And here lies the error, the mistake. And precisely because the way attachment engage with all these different objects and experiences in this distorted manner, which is why it becomes a source of suffering. When reality doesn't gel with our projected image, when there is a discrepancy, it is within that discrepancy that we really suffer. And of course, that can happen in many different ways. The most simplest one is attachment tends to project a sense of permanence onto all these different objects. We project permanence onto our so-called valuable knowledge or information, permanence onto our possessions. They're supposed to hang around. They are supposed to stay valuable one way or another. And reality intervenes, to reveal the impermanence nature of all these things. Your most valuable Ming Dynasty vase, so to speak, that God knows how much it costs, and someone accidentally bump against it and it smash, and there goes your God knows how much money. And of course, we suffer, right? Because for us, that vase is truly valuable. There might be some receipt to prove that it's very valuable. And so we have this, of course, expectation. We project that the vase should stay valuable and we should stay intact. And so now when reality disrupt our plan, so to speak, we really suffer over the loss of it, isn't it? And this is just a trivial example. I'm just giving the easiest example that come to mind. But that's often the case with attachment. In the case of a person, we project all these qualities on the person. We view this person as the source of my true happiness. Of course, naturally, we have this clinging, craving and clinging. We don't want to let go of the source of my own true happiness. And yet, when circumstances change and this source of true happiness goes away, what happened? I lost the source of my true happiness. How can I possibly be happy? And of course, I really suffer over it. and that is the act of the effect of attachment. Yeah. Or maybe a more likely scenario is through spending more time with your object of attachment. Okay, I'll answer that later. Spending more time with your object of attachment, a person, so to speak, and reality intervenes. You see more clearly who this person are. You discover aspects of the person that doesn't gel well with your projected image. So what happens? You are having this projected image that you invest so much time and energy and hope into. Suddenly there's this discrepancy between the reality of that moment and your projected image, and you really suffer. Of course, we suffer in different ways. We can get very angry at the person. How dare you change? How dare you stop being my perfect person? How dare you stop being my source of true happiness? So there's one way in which attachment can create havoc for us. What about spiritual jealousy, such as jealousy in the Sangha? I mean, jealousy in any community, any occasions. Yeah. Well, jealousy is related to attachment, not attachment itself, but related to attachment. So, of course, it involves our object of attachment. So, instead of object of attachment showing us favor or whatever, giving us their attention, the attention is given to someone else, someone less deserving than us. Then jealousy flare up. Jealousy is a very awful feelings, state of mind to experience. Yeah. Because you tend to do really stupid things under the influence of jealousy. And later, when you look back, you really cringe. Yeah. But nonetheless, under the influence of jealousy, we tend to, again, our perception is distorted and our action is sort of not in line. Yeah. Jealousy, of course, therefore, is related to the sense of projecting qualities onto a person, and then we ourselves not receiving what we feel is the attention we deserve, and so on and so forth. And then that's where we have the flare up of jealousy. A bit quite different from what we are talking about in this context of attachment, which is the obstacles to generosity. So I'm going to leave that because it's getting a bit tricky, complicated. So coming back to generosity and coming back to attachment, in this case, attachment leads to hoarding, or leads to clinging. Hoarding in relation to material possessions, in relation to knowledge and information. Clinging in relation to a person. Yeah. Clinging can also express in the form of not willing to share time, share the company of somebody, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So the way to enhance generosity by weakening attachment then require us to investigate into the very nature of the objects of our attachment. So if we are very attached to money, we need to take a good look at our relationship with money, the kind of projected image, ideas we hold dear in relation to money. Or it could be in relation to other material possessions, and or in relation to a particular person, and so on and so forth. It is a challenge in general to deal with attachment, because attachment is so closely associated with pleasant feelings, pleasant experiences, with our notion of happiness, that it makes it actually doubly hard for us. We may not be so willing to look closely at our attachment, at our objects of attachment, because we have this instinctive fear that on close inspection, our fantasies, all our investments in all this projected image may turn out to be false, and so then we are at a loss. I put so much time and energy and money and resources into this, and it turned out to be not true. So I sort of make a fool of myself. I might not be so willing to own up to it. I might not be so willing to face the reality of it. Yeah. So traditionally, we work with attachment through opening our mind to the characteristics of objects, quality of object that is contradictory to the projected image, contradictory to what attachment is telling us, the distortion that is perpetrated by our attachment. The first and foremost, of course, as I mentioned with the Ming Dynasty vase, is the quality of impermanence, a very powerful thing to look into and to appreciate. It sounds very simple. Oh, things change. We all know things change. The things are impermanence, but it takes a long time to work at it and to let its true implication filter through all those layers of defense, layers of projections to really reach our awareness and to see, what I have been holding on to, what I projected out and then value my own projections, how false they are and how far away from reality they are and how harmful such projections may be. So take the example of attachment to certain material things, attachment to, let's say, I have a lot of attachment, of course. Just at this moment, I cannot think of, this trivial one, it's a funny one. We used to have at this workplace, many years ago, we used to have a habit of, a kind of a custom of buying a birthday cake for every staff, during birthday. And I always volunteer myself to be the one to cut the cake, because first of all, you can cut it the way you want, and everybody always want a small piece of cake. And then if it's a nice cake, I can leave a really big piece for myself. So I might project, and this sounds trivial, of course, but we can just work with it. We have this instinctive idea. We don't even think of it as a projection. We think as if intrinsic to that cake that looks so delicious and wonderful is true happiness, true pleasure, so to speak. Yeah. So as if the pleasure is inherent within the cake itself, and we really believe in it. Which is why I was saying, if you have a bigger piece, that can only mean one thing for me. I will have a smaller one, isn't it? So much more important to take control of the distribution of my source of pleasure, so to speak. Yeah. So in that very simple example, already hoarding makes an appearance, isn't it? How can I ensure that I have more and you have less? Because in this world of limited commodity, if you have more of my source of happiness, that can only mean one thing for myself. I will have less of it. So that's the thinking of stinginess, of hoarding. Not hoarding in the psychological sense, but this tendency to hold on to something for oneself. Attachment is very self-centered in this case. Yeah. So I project a kind of image that this is the source of true pleasure for myself. And being self-centered, I want more of it for myself. In fact, I want all of it for myself. I don't want to share. I don't want to give it out because I think that would diminish my happiness, my pleasure, and I don't want that to happen. So there are a few factors here, right? So happiness, pleasure, for self-centered. How can I have more of that for myself? Notwithstanding the fact that maybe the more cake I eat, the lesser the pleasure actually go down. Maybe the suffering of eating so much sugar may start to arise. Yeah. And also, the very act of being attached itself is contradictory to my enjoyment, my true happiness. I spend so much time worrying and trying to hold on to my so-called source of pleasure that I quite often don't even really enjoy the cake. I'm so preoccupied with the idea that this is supposed to be something really pleasant for me that I am actually distracted from the actual enjoyment of the actual object itself. To understand impermanence in this case can be quite helpful. To recognize that there is a limit to the amount of cake I can eat at any occasion before the so-called pleasure turn into pain, turn into something really unpleasant, upset stomach or whatever it is, too high calories, not good for my health, clogging up all my arteries with unhelpful stuff. To recognize that the experience themselves are subject to change, are open to change, and there is no way I can prevent that change. I cannot hold back that change. In the case of all the different objects, including people that we are attached to, they are bound to change. Even if they don't make any effort on their parts, change is ongoing, physically, emotionally, mentally, due to interacting with changing circumstances. And of course, in the case of a human relationship, there is always the reality of death itself. That even no matter how hard we try and how unwanted the experience is, we would be visited by death, by separation. And at that moment, if we have strong attachment, strong resistance to death, to change, then we will really suffer for it. Okay, so that is just a very brief presentation of the paramita of generosity, touching on the three ways we practice giving of teaching, giving of fearlessness, giving of material possessions, material objects. I touch on attachment as the main obstacles to the practice of generosity. A little bit about how attachment function by projecting an unrealistic image onto the objects themselves and involve distortion, but lead us to hold on to all these things. Attachment is primarily self-centered, and we do it for the sake of this idea of self. And generosity, of course, is the opposite. It's the sharing, it's the giving. And the Buddha said that actually, if we are wise, we would make great effort to give away all these impermanent things that we cherish and we try to hold on to. It is in the act of giving them away and sharing it with others, especially those in need, and benefiting others, that we are creating the true causes of happiness. There are happiness in the act of giving itself. There is a happiness of letting go of attachment, which is a source of suffering. Letting go of self-centeredness, which is yet another source of suffering. So much attention all turned inward towards this idea of self that is not very healthy, whereas in giving, the attention is taken away from this self-centeredness and placed on others, connecting with others, and through sharing and giving, help to strengthen our connection and our relationship with others, especially expressed through kindness and compassion. So the Buddha said, it is actually, if we are wise, it is through giving away all these things that we are holding on to, that we are creating happiness in this moment, in the act of giving itself, because we find, especially when the gift is appreciated, we can immediately have a sense of joy at what we have done. But even if it's not appreciated, it is still a wholesome act, and that in the future will ripen to bring about greater happiness for ourselves. So if we are truly wise, it is better to share and to give instead of trying to hold on to all these impermanent things. And I would like to introduce a meditation for us to, at least on a mental level, to practice giving, practice sharing, and to see whether this might help to familiarize ourselves with the mental intention of generosity, and to also give us an opportunity to explore the spirit of generosity within ourselves, that what is possible for us when we are able to open our heart, when we are able to put aside attachment and we are able to embody kindness and compassion in the act of sharing, at least on a mental level, through the power of imagination and visualization. So this is the meditation on Tongling. Tongling has two movements. Usually we tend to notice the taking part, which we breathe in and we take upon ourselves. We breathe in another person's share of suffering and pain or unhappiness, our compassion. Almost like saying that I'm willing to practice the practice of empathy, to feel with you what you are feeling, so that I can have a better understanding and I'm able to invoke genuine compassion for this person, to really understand this person's situation, to put ourselves in their shoes, to stand in their place, even briefly, and to take on that suffering and unhappiness, and to see for ourselves, and also to invoke our natural compassion. So that is the taking in part, usually symbolized by breathing this person's suffering and unhappiness and problem in the form of, let's say, dark smoke, and breathe it into our own heart. So there's the taking part. But there is also the opposite, which is the giving part, which is to imagine. Traditionally, it says imagine our all the things that we possess, so our material possessions. Imagine our body, which is our most cherished possessions, as well as our so-called roots of virtue. That means our accumulation of all these positive actions, positive potential, positive momentum, which are, of course, the source of our future happiness. So to imagine gathering together our material possessions, our body, our roots of virtue or merit, and then transform this, which is our so-called our stockpile of our own happiness and positive potential, transform this our stockpile of our source of happiness into light, and send that light to this person. Allow the light to flow into the person's body, to uplift their spirit, and to imagine this positive energy transform into whatever it is that is desired by this person, but of course in a beneficial way, not harming them, so that their wishes may be fulfilled, so that they have the conditions for the happiness that they long for. So this giving part is therefore a practice, at least on a mental level, of generosity, of giving. So I would like to guide this meditation. And I also want to draw your attention to some of the mechanism of this meditation that make it so powerful, especially in the context of practice of the paramita of generosity, because it works to counteract our self-centeredness, which is at the heart of attachment. Self-centeredness is sometimes, even though self-centered, we can still give. Of course, that giving is motivated come from a different place. Come from how I can maybe prop up my sense of self. Try to create or live up to a certain self-image I have of myself as being a generous person. So much so that others becomes objects. Others are just objects, are props that I might give to you in order to feel better about myself. So I'm much more concerned. Really, the focus is on myself as opposed to others. And Tonglen is very helpful to reverse this kind of self-centeredness, this kind of act of generosity where the prime concern is really about me as opposed to others. And because the first part of Tonglen requires us to put ourselves in someone's shoe. Even the person we want to practice generosity with, put myself in that person's shoe, to see their world, their experience through their eyes, to experience it from them, and to invoke genuine compassion for their situation, especially if it's a difficult situation. And with compassion, to also open the heart to express genuine love, genuine loving kindness, loving concern and kindness, and to transform my store of happiness and share that. And in a very specific way, that this becomes the condition for this person to be happy. to fulfill this person's wishes, not my wishes, but this person's wishes, and for them to be happy in the way that they long for, not according to my expectation. Because sometimes also giving is an arena for us to impose our view, impose our idea on others, out of notion of saying, oh, I love you, and this is what you have to do, because this is what I think you need to do in order for you to be happy. Could be true, but sometimes could be false also. Yeah. And to instead to put ourselves in another person's place, to be other focused, to be orientated from another person's perspective, and to transform our source of happiness so that it becomes the condition for them to fulfill their dreams, for them to find what they really long for them to be happy in accordance to their definition. So long as this is not too distorted and not harmful. Makes Tongling a wonderful practice for cultivating generosity. Okay, sharing skills or your competitive edge to your competitors or enemy. Well, I think we do need to practice common sense. Yeah, I mean, of course, if you are that generous and you think that you want to really benefit your competitors or your enemy in that way, I can't say that it's necessarily wrong. But again, this has to do with practice of generosity and this idea of being perfect. Somehow we have to achieve some kind of perfection in generosity. If somebody open their mouth, we cannot say no. And what about my competitors? Maybe I shouldn't keep all my trade secrets. I must publish them in the public domain for everybody. I mean, I cannot say no. I mean, if that's what you want to do, then that's what you do. But it doesn't require us to always go to the extreme. Like, why must it has to be like, is this all or nothing kind of thinking? If I want to be generous, I must be generous all the way to the other extreme. Why not be a little bit more generous first? Maybe a kinder, less competitive. I mean, we are in competition, but we don't have to be nasty with one another. To not necessarily share your most valuable trade secret, but at least in terms of interaction with others, to be more friendly. To apart from what is most essential to your business operation, other interaction, you can be more generous and more gracious, so to speak. Why not start there? So receiving is important too. Of course, at this moment, what I have so far I've talked about, I'm not talking about receiving another person's generosity. I haven't get there yet. So this receiving, this taking is not about receiving another's generosity. This taking is about putting ourselves in another person's place when we practice generosity, so that we not, we tend to do this. We tend to be generous to others from others. You need to write in longer sentences, Craig. But all I'm saying in Tonglen is we place ourselves in another person's place, let's say the person we want to practice generosity towards, in order to fully understand, not fully, we probably wouldn't be able to better understand them from their perspective, so that our gift is something appropriate and genuinely helpful to them, and not something that we forcefully impose on them. Another way of using the word receiving, of course, is how we receive another person's act of generosity. And that is a totally different matter altogether. Of course, it does also impact on our sense of self. Are we able to not only be generous in giving, but also in gracious in receiving, and to have a sense of gratitude, and to recognize that we are all interdependent. No one is in isolation or standalone, self-sufficient. And so there are also many occasions where we are recipients of others' kindness, either intentionally or unintentionally. And that That is also in itself a practice. But we're not going there today. Let's stick to generosity, and let's do a meditation on Tonglen now, and to try on some of the ideas that I mentioned, and to see whether we can touch the place within ourselves of compassion and kindness and the spirit of generosity, where we, at least on an imaginary level, we extend ourselves and think of sharing our source of happiness with others, so that it would become a source of happiness to them. Right? So I invite you to join me. Just settle your body in a comfortable meditation posture. Try to adopt a posture that allows your back, your spine to assume a natural position, upright. If you are sitting straight, if you are lying down your back in the supine position. Rest your hands and arms on some kind of physical support, so that we don't have to tense up the arm muscles or shoulder muscles to hold up the weight of the arms. And feel free to close your eyes completely if you find that helpful, or you can also leave your eyes open or half open. So let's take a few moments, just allow the body to adjust itself, to find its way into the posture. With our awareness, we tune in to the sensations coming forth from beneath us. We want to reassure our body by sensing and noticing how the body is actually resting on the surface, on the support that come across as very solid, firm, and stable, and that the whole body in this posture is well supported, well balanced, and safe. So this preliminary kind of tuning in help the body to settle in its own time, gradually into the posture, that when the body is ready, it may start to loosen up, to unwind all by itself. It realizes that it does not have to be so tight and tense, and therefore it can let go of some of those contractions and tightenings, those areas of discomfort within the body. You can release that, so that given time, the body becomes more and more comfortable in the meditation posture. Second step, is always helpful to take a few minutes at the beginning of the meditation just to help our body and mind to shift gears, to transition into the meditative state. And at this moment, we can make use of the breath as a support to help us to do that. So see if we can tune in or allow the sensations of the breath to come into awareness, so that we are able to fully experience our natural in-breath and out-breath. Without much effort, and definitely without the need to tense up, just allow ourselves to notice and be aware of the sensations, the movements of breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in, we allow oxygen, fresh air to flow into our lungs, into our system, which is the oxygen is transported by the blood from our lungs to all parts of our body, to every single cell in our body. And the out-breath, the natural out-breath, help us to release the carbon dioxide built up in the lungs, the stale air, to release that from our system and allow it to disappear into the space. So coming back to the breath sensations, becoming aware of the sensations of the breath. See if we can, especially with each out-breath, take that as an opportunity to release. breathing out. As we are aware of it, we can, in our mind, say the word release, facilitate our body and mind in releasing any unhelpful tension, reactivity, put aside the different thoughts or concerns that are not related to the meditation. Returning our attention to the breath, or invite the breath sensations again and again to come into awareness. Make the breath the support for our attention, our awareness in this meditation, and invite ourselves back to the breath again and again if we do get distracted. Breathing out, releasing, deepening the sense of release, maybe physically, maybe mentally, helping body and mind to slowly, gradually settle down into meditation. Now I invite you to bring to mind just one person, maybe someone close to you, someone you know fairly well, family member, a loved one, a friend, maybe someone in need, someone in difficulties that you know. Just choose one person. See if you can picture this person together with you. Let into your mind a visual image of this person. Looking at this person, imagine as you breathe in, just breathe in naturally, don't necessarily have to keep taking deep breaths. Imagine with the in-breath, you draw out from this person his or her share of difficulties, challenges, his or her share of suffering and pain and unhappiness. And imagine that those take a certain form, a visual form, such as dark smoke, something that looks unpleasant or unhealthy. And as we breathe in, we invite that to flow in along with the breath. You can start with a tiny amount if that's all you can manage at this moment. Breathe that little bit of dark smoke in with the in-breath. Let it come all the way into our system, into our own heart. Breathing in, imagine taking on and allow ourselves to be open and to be aware of this person's challenges and struggles, to feel a little bit of their suffering and unhappiness, and to awaken within our mind, our awareness, what we know about this person, his or her current or past experiences, struggle, losses. Let those experiences come into our awareness, into our own heart, in the form of dark smoke, breath by breath, at our own pace. Coming back to the breath, be aware of the breath sensations, be aware of the person in front of you, breathing in, letting in a bit more of that dark smoke that represents his or her challenges and difficulties. Allow that to flow into our system, to our heart, to open our heart, to invoke compassion. Compassion, there is the intention, may you be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. In so doing, imagine we are stepping into this person's shoes to experience their life, their experiences, to see through their eyes. to shift our focus from one that is preoccupied with the self to one that is viewing through this other person's perspective, to become other-centered, so to speak. And then having focused on the in-breath for a while, taking on his or her share of suffering, we shift and focus on the out-breath, breathing out, releasing from our heart. As we breathe out, imagine we release, we share our store of happiness in the form of our material possessions, our body, our roots of virtue, all of which are sources of our current and future happiness. Transform them into visual form, such as light, and breathe that out. Allow the light to flow out of our heart, our system, following the out breath, and flow into this person's body and mind and heart, illuminating them with something really radiant and bright and wonderful, with as well as other qualities of warmth, of lightness, of joyfulness. Breathing out slowly at our own pace, offering, sharing the light, which is our store of happiness. Imagine it flow into this person's body and mind and heart. Imagine it transform into the feeling of happiness, into the sources of happiness, into what this person may long for or wish for, may want for themselves. And see if we can do so from a motivation of kindness and generosity, the wish to share and the wish that this person may find happiness and the causes of happiness. And then feel free at our own pace, alternate between the two movements, occasionally focusing on the in-breaths, taking in, letting in the darkness, the dark smoke, invoking empathy and compassion, opening our hearts, shifting our attitude from one of self-centeredness to one of other-centeredness. And then on other occasions, shift to the out-breath, breathing out, sharing, giving, extending the light to flow into this person and make that the source of happiness for this person. Coming back to the breath, if you do get distracted, just come back here and now, reconnect with the breath sensations at our own pace, without rush. Don't even need to keep taking deep breaths. Just let the breath flow naturally. It can be short, it can be fast, it can be shallow. It doesn't really matter. With each in-breath at our own pace, just let in a little bit more of that darkness to stay connected with this person's situation, to try to see things from his or her perspective, to be other-centered. And then breathing out to share in our own way, give that sharing a form, sharing the light with the intention of kindness, of generosity. May you find happiness and the causes of happiness. And if you feel like it, you can say goodbye to this person for the time being and shift your focus to yet another person. We don't always have to dig really deep. We just stay at the surface sometimes, breathing in a little bit of that darkness to reorientate our attention, to put ourselves in this person's place. And we breathe out some light, sharing our store of happiness with the other person, offering them our sources of happiness with the intention that may they too find happiness and the causes of their happiness. And then finally, if you like, you can even shift the focus of the meditation and place it on ourselves, so that as we breathe in the darkness from within ourselves, as if darkness emerge from our own body and flow into our nostrils, following the breath back into our own heart, where we can extend compassion and acknowledge our own share of suffering, challenges, and difficulties. And as we breathe out, we extend kindness and generosity towards ourselves, sharing the light, illuminating ourselves from a genuine place of loving kindness. May I find happiness and the causes of happiness, that we ourselves can also be the objects of our own generosity, coming from a place of compassion, of kindness for ourselves. Of course, the last bit of that toning meditation is opening a can of worms also to what is the distinction between when are we genuinely generous with ourselves and when we are just simply being self-centered and self-focused and self-absorbed. Yeah, so that is too big a question to answer today. So I'll just give a very brief introduction to the paramitas of generosity. I hope to draw your attention to certain aspects of it. Not that I managed to go into great depth of explanation. There's generosity of teaching, of giving a teaching, fearlessness of material possessions, material resources. That generosity, paramita generosity, we need to practice it on the twofold foundation of compassion and wisdom, and also not to neglect integrating it with the other 5 paramitas, which we will go through in more details in subsequent sessions. And the last thing I want to touch on is a lot of these so-called advices that people give when we study this topic of paramita generosity, little formulas that are very popular in spiritual circle, Buddhist circle. People say, oh, when you give, you must always give the very best. You must always practice giving until it hurts a little bit. Otherwise, you're just staying in your comfort zone. All these little advices could be very helpful, but I also caution you to think a little bit with each one of them. We are all very different. We have different circumstances. We have different challenges. We have different personalities also. And so there is no one single advice, especially this pithy kind of instruction that is automatically applicable to every one of us. The reason why I say this is sometimes things can go very wrong. if you don't exercise some kind of awareness when you put some of this instruction into practice, instead of enhancing generosity, they can really sort of twist our mind around. Like we have this thing about when you give, you must always give your best. It's not as innocent as it sounds. Oh, what is the best? And what happens if you don't feel like giving the best? You're not ready to give the best. And what happens if your definition of the best doesn't fit in with other people's definition of what is the best you can give? So I think with the practice of the practical aspect of generosity, it's always good to approach it with mindfulness, and also with wisdom, and also with some common sense, and really look at how the actual giving itself, what sort of impact it has, what sort of effect it may actually have on ourselves. Is it really helping us to be more generous, or is it entrenching certain attachment, or are we suppressing something? We're in denial of certain aspects of ourselves that we are not ready to acknowledge in our practice of generosity. Okay, so that's it. That's all I have for the paramita of generosity. So thank you very much for your generous attention this evening. I wish you have a good week ahead, and I hope to see you next week when we explore the rest of the paramitas. Right. Thank you. Good night.